Alright, let's look at Standard 16. The student will identify key developments in the aftermath of World War I. So we're going to look at these key developments after World War I, and let's look at the standard here has 4 substandards. Okay, A, B, C, D. Alright, let's look at those. 16A. Explain how rising communism and socialism in the United States led to the Red Scare and immigrant restriction. So we're going to be looking at here Red Scare of the 1920s and how in the Red Scare we limited or restricted immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. And our elements are socialism and communism, how they rose, their rising popularity in the United States, the Red Scare of the 1920s and immigration restriction. Social and political interactions are the themes. In 1917, during World War I, Russia had a revolution, and it's called the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks were fighting over who would have power control over Russia. And the Bolsheviks, which are the Reds, by the color of their flag, they were called the Reds, win. Vladimir Lenin, who became a dictator, communist dictator, and the Bolsheviks were communist. And they named Russia, renamed it United Soviet Socialist Republic, or the USSR, sometimes referred to as the Soviet Union. As a result of this communism, Americans are going to have this anxiety or fear of the spread of this type of thing happening here in the United States, revolution. Well, let's look at what communism is. Okay, in communism, based on Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, was an economic system. Communism was an economic system where the people in society would cooperate and own everything mutually. There would be no governments, there would be no private property, no markets to sell goods in. Basically, with the good of the people, everybody would live together in harmony. Some people think this is a pipe dream. It really doesn't work. And so in the United States, we don't operate on communism, we operate on capitalism. And under capitalism, there's going to be haves and have-nots. You know, there's going to be private property, and people are going to invest in those private businesses, like Walmart is a private business, McDonald's, Verizon, Coca-Cola. All those are actually corporations, but people invest in those and they use it as a corporation, and they make a profit from this. They work hard, and the economic system is based on a free market. Supposedly we have a mixed economy with a little bit of socialism in it, and privately owned industry. There's producers and consumers, and there's a market where you can buy things from. In strict communism, you don't have that. Now, socialism is, we have tinges of it here in the United States mixed in with our capitalism, is where the government owns all property, regulates the economy, and runs most major industry. And we can see this in our, like Georgia Power and our electricity and some other areas in which the government kind of regulates, like the environmental protection division of the government. At any rate, the goal of Russian communism was to spread the idea and ideology of it. Workers of the world unite, break your chains. And it's a movement against, it's a labor movement, pretty much. It's interpreted in the United States as that a bunch of spies are going to be coming to the United States. They're going to promote communism, they're going to ruin capitalism, destroy the United States. That was the fear. So this period where Communist Party like Eugene Debs here is taking off in the United States, it's a labor party, is scaring a lot of people, and all these unions and all these strikes and all these riots going on in the United States really kind of alarms a lot of Americans, causes them to become fearful that our country is going to be taken over by these communists, these socialists, anarchists, and all these people are threats to capitalism and the American way of life. And so the fear of the Red Scare, you know, that where Americans believe that communist sympathizers and other radicals were planning to undermine U.S. government. The labor unions were under attack a lot by these people here who felt that labor unions were attacking business, Therefore, they were communists. And a lot of people in labor unions are going to be labeled as communist. And people who are not American, people who come from Southern and Eastern Europe, Italians, those type of people, are going to be called un-American or red, referring to the color of the communist, or commies. They're going to be called commies. And with workers' unions and strikes, they're going to kind of cast them out as being communist. And what's going to happen to the number of unions in the United States in the 20s is going to decrease until the 1930s in LRB, and we're going to talk about that later. But there's going to be a decrease in the number of union membership in the United States because they're going to be associated with as communist or socialist. Here's an article that's very interesting, come from the Bainbridge Post-Searchlight, November 6, 1919, during the Red Scare. And this is an article from a butcher in New York City named Adolf Goebel. And he says that these union strikers, that butcher strikers, come to him, and he says he denounced the strikes as the first step in a Bolshevist movement to take over his plant in Brooklyn, New York. It says after the butchers had gone on strike, unionists planned, after accomplishing their purpose, basically tells him he could have 6% on his investment if he divides the rest of his profits up with them in their union. These communists, basically what's called Bolshevist movement. Bolshevist plot is seen in strike, and this is in the Bainbridge Post-Searchlight during this Red Scare of the 1920s. And in these unionists, these strikers are going to be considered communist, and that's why a lot of them are going to be kind of mistreated, I guess you could say. And Bolshevist goes back to this Bolshevist revolution, Bolshevik, and that's why the article refers to it as a Bolshevist movement. And here's a cartoon showing, the anti-labor type union strike type stuff, is that it causes disorder and riots. It's Bolshevism, murders, chaos. These cartoons, this Red Scare is painting these people. Here's one here. Here's a Bolshevism. This guy's pulling them down under. This is civilization. There's war in Europe, and it's burning because of all these anarchists and Bolshevists. That's why World War I happened. And here's United States solid ground. Here's these Bolshevik labor union strikists, all these people with socialist and communist ideas trying to pull civilization down. And here's one here, European anarchist, shows him by the Statue of Liberty, trying to blow it up. In other words, the destruction of America and civilization. Here's one here. This one we're going to talk about in just a second, how the eagle here is throwing out all this trash, is cleaning the nest, and the eagle represents the United States. Here's the red flag, this foreign radical here, the train coming, the American industry. He's trying to stop American industry, trying to stop business and capitalism. There's the symbolism there. We're going to come back to this symbolism here in a minute. Anyway, this all comes to a head in January 2nd, 1920, when the Attorney General, A. Mitchell Palmer, bust into people's offices and homes and arrest over 4,000 people without warrants that are foreign-born radicals. And even 500 of them, aliens, he deports them back to their home country without a court hearing, without a trial, without due process. And, this is looked on today with a lot of disgrace, but during this time, he boots them out. And here's the cartoon showing his Palmer raids. Communist, anyone suspected to be a communist or socialist was pretty much sent back to their home country or arrested. A lot of these 4,000 were released and let go. But what happens eventually is in 1924, Congress passes what's called the National Origins Act. And in it, they're going to take, you remember we talked about new immigration, where a lot of immigrants around 1890s come from Southern and Eastern Europe. We talked about that. Come into Ellis Island. At this time, this is where we're going to restrict immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe with this National Origins Act of 1924. So the law is going to limit annual immigration to 2% of what the country's population was in the United States in 1890. And since there weren't many people from Southern and Eastern Europe in 1890, that reduces the number tremendously of how many could come into the United States. And we see this here in this cartoon here that shows immigrants, red, rum, and Rome, Italians, anywhere they're from, that they may be anarchists or socialists or communists. The United States wasn't letting them in. Here's the impact of the National Origin Act of 1924. From 1907 to 1914, there were 685,531 immigrants come from Southern and Eastern Europe. By the time this act of 1924, the National Origins Act, is passed, only 21,847 will be allowed into the country in that year. So, big time restriction on immigration coming from countries that are socialist, anarchist, or communist. We didn't want them in the country. So we see here that this eagle here throwing out the trash pretty much is the immigration restriction, and Palmer kicking out 500 aliens, sending them back to the country. So if we were to summarize here, we'd say that the first Red Scare of 1919-1920, this fear of communism, basically has three characteristics. We see the Bolshevik Revolution in Soviet Union, or Russia changed to the Soviet Union, USSR, where the communists come to power. And then we see industrial strikes in industries all across the United States to the point of rioting and violence. And then immigration restriction from Southern and Eastern Europe. Those are the three characteristics of the Red Scare, and you need to know those for the EOCT. So have we met our objective? Did we explain the rise in communism and social in the United States led to a Red Scare and immigration restriction? I think we have. Raise your hand, ask questions in class. Good luck on the quiz, test, and the EOCT. And our elements are socialism and communism, how they rose, their rising popularity in the United States, the Red Scare of the 1920s, and immigration restriction. Social and political interactions are the themes. In 1917, during World War I, World Standard here has 4 substandards. Okay, A, B, C, D. All right, let's look at those. 16A. Explain how rising communism and socialism in the United States led to the Red Scare and immigrant restriction. So we're going to be looking at here Red Scare of the 1920s, and how in the Red Scare we limited or restricted immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. Alright, let's look at Standard 16. The student will identify key developments in the aftermath of World War I. So we're going to look at these key developments after World War I, and let's look at the World War I. Russia was had a revolution, and it's called the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks were fighting over who would have power control over Russia, and the Menshevik